Welcome back to another episode of the First Team College Football Show. I am Joe DeLeone, joined by former Tennessee and Louisville and NFL QB Matt Sims. Also got Ryan Roberts here, Irish Breakdown recruiting analyst. Today, guys, we're going to continue on breaking down the various first-year coaches that we had. We did a first look at this, giving grades on guys, how they did in their first season as head coaches. We're moving on to a more polarizing group, I think. I think yesterday we started off with the big schools, the guys who, a lot of them got pretty good grades, and we knew how they performed. But I think starting off with some of these, we're going to get some pretty spicy takes, particularly Billy Napier, Marcus Freeman, Brent Venables, and Sonny Dykes are the four that we're going to be getting to today. Guys, I want to kick things off, though. Starting off by talking about Billy Napier, who last year was very up and down. Things for Florida started off really hot. They started off the season with a huge win against Utah, which many predicted to be a team that was going to participate in the college football playoff at the end of the season. But after that win, it was a very rocky road for them as they suffered losses against Kentucky and then other questionable SEC opponents, as performances from Anthony Richardson were not enough to carry them through a lot of these games. Their final record at the end of the season was 6-7. They did finish 11th in the On3 recruiting rankings, with a 4-star defensive lineman, Kelby Collins, is one of the premier guys in the class, and then 4-star DB Jakeem Jackson being another. Now, they did lose out on Jaden Rashada, which we spent so much time talking about the impact of that on this recruiting class, and I think that we're going to probably end up bringing him up, talking about how we would grade him in terms of recruiting and in on-field success. And, man, I want to kick things over to you first. For grading Billy Napier, what do we think?
And also, when you're introducing me, you got to throw in there El Camino Junior College, man. Don't skip over the junior college experience, all right? All those guys out there, got to show respect to the JUCO guys out there.
Wait, where is El Camino before we get into
It's in Torrance, California, right off Crenshaw Boulevard, baby, all right? It was awesome. It was good football.
Right in my backyard
right?
over here in Manhattan.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's right in your backyard. Billy Napier, tough season. With the recruiting, obviously there's been some salvation here late in the 11th hour. With the Jaden Rashada situation, heavy blow to just kind of the whole feeling and vibe that you get going into this offseason for this Florida team. I think overall for his grade, it's a D. I think he gets a D for the past year. I think the reason is because Florida's expectations are just so high. I think the fact is they lost a lot of tough games that, in the view of Florida fans and for a coach of Billy Napier's stature and his success that he had at Louisiana, that they can't lose those type of games. Big question mark really going forward, replacing Anthony Richardson, developing a little bit more consistency on the offensive side of the football, right? Being able to win games at the line of scrimmage a little bit more consistently, especially in the SEC East, which is so important, especially with Georgia being right there next to you. But yeah, I think overall it's a D for Billy Napier. And like Ryan said last week regarding some of these coaching gradings that we have, really I think the grade will be more it'll be easier for us to make a grade for Billy a year from now into his second year, especially in a situation where he's replacing Coach Mullen in the environment of Florida football and having his own imprint on this program.
Yeah, no, and it's a great note. I am happy, Matt. I don't know if you noticed this, but my camera went haywire over here. It went all over the place. Joe wasn't looking, so he completely missed it. I looked up. He was just looking off the screen. It was fantastic. But I think, Matt, honestly, though, man, I think he hit on so many great points there. And I was in the same realm of like, it's a D, right? Like it's a D plus. It's somewhere in that ballpark because at Florida, it's just not acceptable to see a 6-7 record ever. I mean, Dan Mullen was 2 years removed from playing in an SEC championship game and giving it the SEC champ the best fight anybody has given Georgia all year. I mean, like that is where we were with this team, right? So I really when I look at where this Florida program is, man, I'm worried about it. I liked to hire Billy Napier originally. I was like, I love what he did at Louisiana. He didn't get the star-studded recruits, but he was always considered a great developer of young players, right? And I'm just like, give him some SEC talent and see what he does with it. the future could be bright. And you saw this first year, I mean, things just felt disorganized at times. It felt like there was a lack of development throughout the season. The team that started the season, to your point, Joe, started off hot. They looked like they had a lot of promise. You fizzled. And then at the end of the year, I was just questioning whether this team was even bought in to what this coaching staff was trying to accomplish. So there was just a lot of things, man. And I don't like to get hyperbolic with this type of stuff because it's only 1 year, right? He could turn this around very quickly. But at the end of the day, he did nothing for me in year one that parlayed confidence into me to say, like, yeah, no, they'll figure it out. They got this, man. Like they'll be okay. You know, like we'll get to one guy on this list that didn't have a great year, but like you could see some things to take from it and be like, but it'll be okay, possibly.
Right.
I'm worried about the future of Billy Napier. I'm worried about the quarterback position at the University of Florida. I'm worried about several things here where I just don't know how you can have a ton of confidence, man. I'm in wait and see mode for year two. I have high expectations because that's what Florida demands. So we'll see what ultimately happens, but year one was just not where you wanted to start if you're Billy Napier.
And I guess the reason why I have some sort of a positive outlook going into next season is just because of his track record at a school like Louisiana, where he has been successful, like you said, Ryan, in developing players. Biggest question mark, though, is you don't have time to develop guys in the SEC. You need to get guys that can play right away and develop them into pro football players as you continue to coach them. So that'll be the big question mark is, can he be just an absolute dog in recruiting going forward?
Right. Yeah, and I think that trajectory too, Matt, is it's a great point because you can't do that at the University of Florida. Maybe if it was a Vanderbilt with Clark Lee or it was a Mike Stoops at Kentucky, like you can afford to be patient, right? Because the expectations are not quite as high. But at Florida, the expectations are always high.
Right. And I think that the biggest part of this, the 6 and 7 season is what it is. It's a failure, as we're talking about here. And for them to not be more competitive in a lot of games, like the great example here of their lack of competitiveness, I mentioned that Kentucky game, that was their first real SEC test. That was their first opportunity to establish themselves. And by the end of the season, we realized that Kentucky was not as good as I think we might have hoped that they were. They were overranked for a lot of the season.
Right.
And they got their butts kicked. It felt like that they were getting their butts kicked the entirety of that game. And that Kentucky team, again, was not as good as we thought it was. But outside of the way that they performed on the field, I think from the last show, one of the main takeaways that we had was, how do they do in recruiting? How do they attack the transfer portal? How do they fill some of their needs? I see a roster that has regressed rather than improved. And I hate to say this, but Graham Mertz being your answer at quarterback after having Anthony Richardson, who was showing some really positive signs of stardom, had he maybe stayed, things would have been pretty bright for Florida. But he couldn't have gotten out of there any quicker in trying to jump to the NFL. But Graham Mertz, man, from Wisconsin has been nothing but frustrating. And I don't know if I have much faith that he's going to change settings and end up at Florida with more consistently difficult competition, that he's suddenly going to be better. So I don't know if there's more questions for me. That's where I'm talking about here. There's way more questions.
And I don't even think it's just Graham Mertz, right, Joe? I mean, yes, Graham Mertz in a vacuum has not been a guy that injects a lot of confidence at the college level. But I think it's more the fact that you also don't know who's the next quarterback, right? Like even if Graham Mertz is just a bridge for a year or for a few games, who's the next guy in line? Who's the guy that you're grooming to being that guy? You don't know who that is, obviously, with the Jaden Rashada situation. You don't know who Graham Mertz is a bridge towards. You don't know. And that just leaves even more cloudiness to the future of Florida football, is the fact that you just don't know who those guys, who are going to be the pillars of the program. I don't think you know that right now.
And I think the loss of Patrick Toney is a big issue, too, because he's a guy that was heavily relied upon as just a cornerstone, really, for Billy Napier and his rise to the position that he is now. I mean, he's a guy that coached with him for 5 years, and to lose someone that obviously is a close friend and someone that you really trust on the other side of the football as a defensive mind, I think that is also one of the big losses this year for them going forward.
I'd also like to just add in here, I think the grading significantly is impacted by that loss of Jaden Rashada. Losing Toney, though, Matt, is a really good point. They're also losing their tight ends coach as well with that transition of him jumping to the Arizona Cardinals. And that's a great grab for Gannon, who's the new head coach there. But I just want to circle back here on this Rashada situation. I think that this is just a negative look on the program. And, we got attacked by Florida fans because they were frustrated in their own right and trying to defend their guy. But I think with all the drama going around with that program, it's not a good look. It's not a good look. You only keep hearing more and more drama. And I said this after the Jaden Rashada debacle, that it feels eerily reminiscent to what happened with Brian Harsin at Auburn, where you just keep hearing more and more problems. You don't really, as negative as we were with guys like Mario Cristobal, there was no drama. We knew that team was bad. We knew that he was stepping into a tough situation, but he at least recruited his butt off and things look positive. But I only keep hearing more and more drama. And every time something happens, it's always a negative look on this Florida program.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's unfortunate, man. It really is. Cause Matt, you pulled out a couple silver lining a little bit to it, right? There is some positivity that you can find in here, but it's just, there's far more just negativity in this program right now. Too many, I shouldn't say negativity. I should say question marks. There's too many question marks. Is Billy Napier good enough to be a really good head coach at that level? That's a question mark. Who's the quarterback of the future? That's a question mark. Who are the pillars on this program that are going to take him back to the top? Those are all question marks. And I think you, Joe, you made a good point, man. They did regress a little bit this offseason. And you're in the SEC, man. You're in the premier conference in all of college football. So if you're not getting better on a year-to-year basis, you're falling more and more behind. Like stagnation makes you fall behind in the SEC. The fact that you regressed, it's troubling. It's very troubling.
It reminds me very similar. I feel like Florida is in the same situation that Tennessee was in for, it seemed like a decade. And I was a part of that decade experience. And it just always seemed like we were at that same point year after year after year. And there was no actual progress being made. And now finally, all of a sudden, Coach Heupel comes in and just rewrites the entire script, changes the whole philosophy of the school, brings a different energy and a vibe to him that just, encapsulates really what it is to be a Vol all over again and recaptures the Philip Fulmer hype behind the school. And right now, I think Billy Napier is in that situation too, where, he really needs to take control of this program. And whatever happened between him, the boosters, and the Jaden Rashada situation, that is something that behind closed doors has to get fixed and solved immediately. And maybe that's telling too. Maybe that's something that people behind the scenes where they're, shaking hands with Billy and saying, you're our guy, but secretly they're, stabbing in the back like they're Brutus. That's where it's, a little concerning, especially with Florida. And like we both all have said, the expectations and the dominance that they had in the early 2000s, year after year after year with Urban Meyer, it's something that culture now will never forget, and that's where they expect to be at all times going forward.
Now here's where things might go a little off the rails on the show, as we're going to be talking about Marcus Freeman, first-year head coach, former defensive coordinator for the Fighting Irish, now the head coach of the University of Notre Dame. Finished 9th in the On3 recruiting rankings this past cycle, did lose out on some key 5-star recruits, but still attracted some big-name players like 4-star linebacker Drake Bowen, who we spoke very highly on this show. They did end up pulling a 4-star quarterback in Kenny Minchey, who, again, we spoke very highly on this program. And then Sam Hartman getting a transfer from Wake Forest, one of the most highly coveted recruits in the transfer portal era, potentially, and the impact that he can provide. Still goes 9-4 this past year with losses against Marshall and Stanford, which were the ones that I think are going to be the biggest attraction on his grade here. But Brian, you being the Notre Dame expert and covering recruiting for Notre Dame, what are your thoughts? How would you grade Marcus Freeman's first year?
I think that on field, it was somewhere around a B-. I think when you put in the recruiting conversation, it becomes somewhere in the B, maybe B+ range when you kind of put everything together. Look, 9-4 with where Notre Dame has been over the last few years, it's not a successful season, right? There's no way to paint that. They've been winning 10+ games consistently. That is just kind of the point-blank period to it. I do think the big positive you take from the season, in my opinion, was further you got into the season, Marcus Freeman really started putting more of a stamp on his program. I think the first couple games of the season, it was more of, I trust my offensive coordinator, or I trust my defensive coordinator. I'm going to be the CEO and the overseer. And then after a couple of those losses, like you were talking about, Joe, They end up going 9-2 down the stretch. They have a really nice showing for the most part against South Carolina in the bowl game. But I really think that what you saw was Marcus Freeman took hold of that program and he started not letting some things slide that a first-year coach normally does let slide, right? Like he started he really started grabbing the reins and saying, no, this is how we're going to run my program, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what he needs. So I was very positive at the end of the season on the future of Notre Dame football because I think Marcus Freeman showed a lot of growth in year one. A guy that had never been a head coach at any level. I think he learned on the job a little bit in year one. In a down year, you still go 9-4, right? I mean, there's still positives to parlay from that. And I mean, we saw what happens, after the second game of the season. Your starting quarterback gets hurt, and there were just some limitations that you had a quarterback for the rest of the season. And despite that, you still go 9-2 down the stretch, and you show a lot of growth throughout. So on field, I think there were a lot of positives. Recruiting-wise, yes, they lost out on a guy like Keon Keeley. They got the late Peyton Bowen decided to flip from Oregon to Oklahoma in just a messy recruitment at the end. But regardless of losing out on a couple of those guys, it was still probably the most balanced recruiting class that Notre Dame has had in probably 10 years. Like they hit every single position they had to. Quarterback, running back, 4 wide receivers, a tight end, 5 offensive linemen, 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 2 corners, 3 safeties. Like they hit their quota and they attracted a lot of very good football players. So I think the future's looking up, man. I really do. I think Marcus Freeman has exuded confidence in this staff from a recruiting perspective. These guys are not going to shy away from recruiting those 5 stars. They're not going to shy away from recruiting elite talent and identifying underrated talent as well. So I think there's a lot of positives. I really do. This offseason's been an interesting one because, again, with some of the coaching defections and hires now, you're still seeing Marcus Freeman put his stamp on this program. You are. And going into 2023, there's not many excuses offensively, man. You have a lot of offensive firepower coming back. You have a quarterback in Sam Hartman that's thrown 110 touchdowns in his career, ACC all-time leader in touchdown passes. You finally have a proven commodity quarterback. You have a lot coming back offensively, and you have a defensive man up top that is helping to lead this program. So I expect Notre Dame to take a big jump in 2023. I think the future is bright. Just some growing pains, I think, in year one is the best way that I'll put it.
All things considered, with the fact that Brian Kelly left the way that he did, as suddenly as he did, for the LSU job after he said that he was a Notre Dame man for life. Marcus Freeman, like Ryan said, being a first-year head coach, only 37 years of age, this guy gets a B+. He gets a B+ because he just absolutely exceeded expectations in an extremely tough environment in Notre Dame football. Ryan said they're used to 10-win seasons. Man, he's only 1 win off of that. And we know that some of those games that they're replayed again with just the knowledge that he acquired late in the year, they probably do get the win. But that's football right there. He learned from the losses of those early battles, made the adjustments necessary, reeled in guys like Coach Reese, started to implement a little bit more of a physicality to their team. And, you see just the way that he's handled this whole OC situation. That's more of a black eye on the school than it is the coach. I think the coach has done a great job of cleaning up the school's mistake and their miscalculation or underestimated ability of drawing people in because they have a golden dome on their campus. This is something that I think Notre Dame just has to be more aware of. It's not for everybody. You're going to recruit high-level players. Absolutely. They did a great job recruiting. They're, like we discussed in previous shows, he's done a great job of finding players in areas that they never even looked at before and attracting young, youthful players in a different way. I mean, of course, they're all young. They're in high school, but just attracting a different type of player to the Notre Dame brand that they haven't in the past. And I think that's what's really exciting right now. Marcus Freeman does have that edge to him. He's exciting. He's young. He's youth. Like, he just has that youthful energy that just goes through the whole program. I remember speaking to Harry Heastan when I was there for the pro day with Jack Cohen a year ago. And Harry Heastan, awesome offensive line coach, phenomenal dude, old school guy. And he couldn't say, it was unbelievable how highly he spoke of a guy, Marcus Freeman. And this is a guy that's been coaching for 40 years. So he could have been the guy that says, yeah, I know more than this guy. He's young. He doesn't know anything. I mean, this guy stood up on his soapbox and just said Marcus Freeman is going to be the future of Notre Dame football. And I tend to agree with him after what I saw this year. So B+ for the season, B+ for the recruiting that he's done, and really A+ for covering the tushes of some of these Notre Dame people that made the mistake with the offensive coordinator situation and still salvaging a positive outlook on the whole situation.
And I think that they've already done a pretty good job to recovering from the old offensive coordinator debacle, right? I mean, Matt, you said it obviously from like the media perspective and from like the national perspective type of thing. But he also, one hidden good thing about the whole situation that happened is that Tommy Rees was a quarterback coach, right? So he's a quarterback coach, offensive coordinator. Yeah. He's out. Jared Parker, who's now the new OC, is the tight end coach for Notre Dame. So they were able to bring in a quarterback coach, Gino Guidugli, who is going to specifically coach the quarterback position. They haven't had that in a few years, man. And that was one thing that people always wanted, even with Tommy Rees there, was like, right. I wish there was some way that you can get a really highly qualified GA to work with the quarterbacks more consistently. So I think you've got a really good quarterback coach in Gino. You have to replace Harry Hiestand, obviously, that Matt just talked about. But, I mean, there's some guys that Notre Dame's talking to right now. They had Matt Luke on campus yesterday, who just retired after winning a championship with Georgia last year, who is one of the better developers and recruiters of the offensive line position. So as long as they nail down the offensive line coach position and with the quarterback coach in kind of intact to the offensive coordinator spot, I think Notre Dame has a chance to recover very well.
I think I would have been a lot more critical if we taped the show the week before all of what happened with the offensive coordinator stuff went down. And the reason why I'm saying this is now knowing some of the limitations that Marcus Freeman is dealing with and some of the tampering, if you will, by the administration with trying to do his own thing, I'm going to be less critical. However, I'm still giving Marcus Freeman a B-. And I think that his performance on the field was great, minus 2 games. The 2 games that he lost, though, are an embarrassment. To lose to Marshall and to lose to Stanford. And I know that I get it. You're a first-year head coach. But those are 2 very bad teams. Stanford's one of the worst teams in college football last year. Those are games that you have to win if you're Marcus Freeman. I'm not impressed by the on-field product at all, frankly. I know that there were a lot of good games, but for them also to get their asses kicked by USC the way that they did,
they did not get their asses kicked against USC, Joe.
Dude, I was there for that game, man.
There was
that
a
game
couple plays from it being a one-score game in the fourth quarter.
They couldn't touch Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams ran.
Who touched Caleb Williams? You mean Heisman Trophy winner Caleb Williams? Who touched Caleb Williams all year?
You still need to not allow him to kick to make the amount of plays that he did in that game. He single-handedly.
I mean, yeah, in the defense of Ryan, he did do that versus every team that he played against. So it's not like that was an anomaly.
How many talented players has Notre Dame faced on USC's roster that
I think we just need to define. I think we just need to define what an ass kicking is, because it was one play for being a one-score game in the fourth quarter. I would not call that an ass kicking. Ass kicking is what TCU against Georgia was. That's an ass kicking.
And to defend Marcus Freeman, the one point that I'll make for those is Stanford and USC, at least it's a rivalry game. And rivalry games, sometimes it just weird crap happens. So I'll give him a pass this year for that. Now, going forward next year, if you get – I see that message you sent there, Ryan. That's pretty funny. He's sending you a love message. He says, I hate you, Joe. But – yeah, the conversation between the conversation. But that's what – I'll just say that. Marcus Freeman, you get a pass this year. But next year, losses like Marshall and Stanford, yeah, unacceptable, right? But still, a 9-win season, all things considered, just first-year head coach, the environment of Notre Dame, everything that he's done to really just keep everything together. Because this whole situation, this could have really imploded the entire organization, I think, in a year. And another person that doesn't have quite the same rapport with people and the way that he can communicate and lead, this could have been a totally different year for Notre Dame. So I really do have a ton of faith in Marcus Freeman. I'm excited to see what happens here for Notre Dame.
The last other reason why, though, I have this as a B-, and I know that them finishing where they did in the recruiting rankings is great, and I think that class is great, but I'm a little concerned, and I think that I'm less critical about this because it seems like he has less help than we would hope he would be getting for a first-year coach transitioning into his second year. But to lose a lot of those like big guys that he had committed and then they decommitted and chose to go elsewhere, that to me is just a little frustrating. But I'm not holding that entirely against him because it's still one of the best recruiting classes that Notre Dame's had in recent memory and in the era of these recruiting rankings websites. So I think it's great. It's still like a B class. Yeah. It's still a good class, but losing those guys, like in the long term, a lot of recruits pay attention to that stuff. They're like, why are these guys decommitting after they've been committed for most of the cycle? It's just something to pay attention to.
I agree with you, Joe, but every one of us who's been to Notre Dame knows that it's a different place. And I'm someone, when I was coming out of high school, I loved Notre Dame. I wanted to be a Notre Dame quarterback. I really did. I was praying to God that Charlie Weiss would offer me. He gave me like a pity offer, even though he picked Jimmy Clausen, which was fine. I appreciated the fact that he was still, courteous enough to give me an opportunity. But when I visited Notre Dame really for the first time in my life last year, I said, man, thank God I didn't get offered. Well, thank God, especially in Notre Dame. But I said, I'm thankful that I wasn't offered because this is not the right place for me. I would not have done well as an individual there. That was not the environment that was conducive for my growth as a young man. So that's where going forward, Notre Dame, just know who you are. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. That school, that type of vibe that is there on that campus. It's a beautiful campus. The school is amazing, but it's not for everyone. And that's nothing to really be upset about when other people and coaches pick other places over you.
All right, guys, let's get on to our next one. Great points there on Notre Dame. Next one, Oklahoma. Brent Venables in his first year replacing Lincoln Riley, who this one's going to be, I think, a bit divisive as well.
I really want to know what Ryan thinks on this one.
They finished 7th in the On3 recruiting rankings, and they managed to pull Peyton Bowen, which did they technically get Peyton Bowen? We don't know. Is the letter of intent actually in or not? He might end up going to Texas or USC randomly. Who knows? But I'm obviously joking. They also got 5-star quarterback Jackson Arnold, which many believe is a very sneaky signing in this quarterback class and deserves more positive recognition. And then they also got a very talented transfer player from Indiana in Hassan McCullough, who we talked about on this show for the transfer portal show that we did. They did finish 6 and 7. They did have some pretty embarrassing losses. They did also have a very hard-fought battle in their bowl game against Florida State. But if we were able to give a grade for this, Matt, I want to kick it to you first. How would you grade Brent Venables' first season at Oklahoma?
This one is fascinating to me. I went back and forth multiple times going through this. I just want to highlight really to start, we have 4 games where they lost by 3 points. So you got the Texas Tech, Baylor, West Virginia, and Florida State game where they lost by a total of 3 points. 3 points in each game. Win those football games, man, Brent Venables, you are the man. You did a great job coming in and taking the reins and winning, right, in a situation where, there was a lot of question marks and Caleb Williams and his talent leaving, to go to USC with Lincoln Riley. I think overall, I give him a D. I give him a D for this past year just because of the standard of Oklahoma football. And I think that, 6 wins is just not going to do it. It's not going to cut it, especially, for a guy who's getting his first op as really being a head coach of a huge school like this. Now, similar to Billy Napier, I go back to his track record of just being a great coach and a great recruiter to where I'll say we'll know more a year from now, because there is no doubt that a Lincoln Riley run program is going to look a little bit different than a Brent Venables program. And I want to say that just for the simple fact of all the stories that you hear from him at Clemson and what Dabo and him did and how tight of a ship they run from former players there. I think it was just a huge culture shock for the guys that were there before that to adjust. So a lot of good games where you're competitive as hell. Lost the games that you probably really should have lost in the Big 12. But there was those 3 games where, man, if you could have pulled out 2 or 3 of those, or, it would have been a different story. But nonetheless, they didn't. Hopefully in his second year, he could implement a little bit more of his defense. Guy's been a top 10 in defensive rankings for over a decade. So you have to think that will slowly pour into Sooners football. But a 49-0 loss to Texas in the Red River Shootout is a huge shot in the foot for that program. That's something that's unacceptable. But Brent Venables definitely goes back to just his track record. I believe in him. I believe in him as a recruiter. I believe in him as a teacher of men. So I think there's good times ahead for Oklahoma. It just might take a little bit longer than what everyone expects.
I have really mixed feelings on this one, to be completely transparent. I really do. Because I'll be forthcoming that when this hire happens, Brent Venables didn't strike me as a head coaching type. He's a great defensive coordinator, just fantastic. There's no doubt about that. I mean, if Notre Dame's defensive coordinator position was open, if he wanted to come tomorrow, I would have invited him 3 days ago. Like he can come anytime he wants. He's that good of a defensive coach. There's something about him that just does not scream head coach to me. And, we'll see obviously if that improves and what will that look like. He was not dealt a great hand in year one. I mean, there were so many defections from that roster, so many transfers. And I mean, honestly, like the cards were stacked against him to be successful on the football field. So I didn't really have high expectations. I was expecting more in the 8-4 range going into a bowl game, 7-5, somewhere in that. So he actually didn't underperform as crazy lower than what I was expecting. Like I expected him not to be the best product in year one. The troubling part though of the on the field was I felt like in a couple games, because you're right, Matt, there were a few close games, but then there were a couple games where you're just like, man, I don't think his team wanted to play today. Like they just didn't look like they wanted to play. The game against Texas is one where it's like, Texas was an up and down team last year. Like they were good in some games, they were bad in others. But that's a game that no matter what's happening in your season, Oklahoma should be able to get up for, man, and be able to play ball with Texas. Like they should be able to do that. So there was just a couple games that had me worried from an on-field perspective. They come back and they get a really nice recruiting class, though, right? And a lot of talent that's going to be injected into that program. I think it's going to be interesting to see how long the leash is with Brent Venables, because I think that he has a chance to build something really nice, and he's going to inject a lot of talent into this roster. But it's almost like a Florida feel, right? Like how long is 8-5 going to be okay, right? Like how long is 7-5, 8-4, 9-3? Like how long is that going to be okay at the University of Oklahoma? Because this roster is not in a very good place, but it's going to get better. My biggest question is just, is he really a head coach at the end of the day? But I think that he's going to get talent in there, and they're definitely going to play better football because year one I don't think is indicative of his abilities as a coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you guys on this one with Brent Venables, because the on-the-field product last year was not good, and there's those embarrassing losses they had against TCU and Texas, which that is a big knock on them. But you look at the way they finished the season, and I think the fight that they put up in their last game against Florida State, I think was promising. I think you're starting to see a team that was starting to gel. I'm not going to be as critical as I would be with Billy Napier or with Marcus Freeman. I'm giving this a very high C+, maybe like a 79.5, if you will, if I were to grade this on a 100-point scale for grading, because we all hit it on the head here. That roster was decimated. They lost so many guys because Lincoln Riley left, and everybody was upset that was a part of that program that Lincoln left, and everybody kind of did, those that didn't go to USC with him did kind of feel a little backstabbed, and there were other guys that just dipped. So to try and recover from that is a very difficult upfield battle, and I think to finish 6-7 is not great, but to still finish the season strong with a good recruiting class with some really promising, talented players like Peyton Bowen, like Jackson Arnold, I think that there is a very positive future here for Oklahoma. And Ryan, to your point, I think I would hope that they give him a longer leash because he is a good coach. If he can figure it out as a head coach, he was in a situation where things were a lot more difficult to turn things around early on. Guys, we're getting close up on time here. I want to get to our last guy that we've got for our coaches, Sonny Dykes, the man who led TCU to the national championship game where they were walloped by Georgia. Finished 19th in the on-3 recruiting rankings. Some of the key recruits that they had: 4-star wide receiver Cordell Russell, 4-star cornerback Channing Canada. He had a 13-2 record, and as I mentioned, that devastating loss in the national championship game, and also a late last-second loss that they had against Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. Ryan, going to you first. How are we grading things for Sonny Dykes? And by the way, I just would like to clarify here, when we're grading these, as I've said on this show before, it's not just on last year's performance. It's how they've set themselves up for future success. That's what's key here. We're not just looking at one season in general. So Ryan, your thoughts?
I mean, I would give it like an A- with everything all encompassing together, right? I mean, just the on-field product last year was, even though it was a 65-7 loss in the national championship game, it was an A+, man. Like, who expected them to be in that position? Who expected them to be in the playoffs? I certainly didn't expect that. So I thought Sonny Dykes in year one did a tremendous job. I think the question that I have is it sustainable? Or did he fall into the right situation with a lot of seniors, right, that had played a bunch and maybe just were misused at times, right? But I think that he showed in year one he's a very good football coach. He was able to find a situation that was advantageous for a quick turnaround in year one. Fantastic. That's great. And he parlayed that into some recruiting success. I mean, 19th overall might not sound great to some people, but it's TCU, guys, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's TCU. They're not going to recruit at the highest level, but more and more you're hearing TCU's name on the recruiting trail, which is a great positive sign for them. So I think he has a chance to build something good and sustainable. My question is, is it sustainable to the degree that you're going to be winning Big 12 championships every year and that you're going to be competing for a playoff spot? Like, I don't know if that sustainability is necessarily in the cards, but they're definitely in a better situation than they were the last couple of years under Coach Patterson. I mean, the last couple of years, it was just doling out. It was just you had hit the ceiling with Gary Patterson a few years before that, and you just kind of were hitting your head against the wall. You needed a change. Sonny Dykes did a tremendous job. It's definitely heading in the right direction. I just have some question of, like, how high is the sustainability here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think Ryan, is spot on with this one. My grade for him would be an A+. And really it has nothing to do with the recruiting. I know we're doing the conglomerate ranking, but it's just the fact is A+ because he went to the national championship. I apologize to Coach Dykes for the way that I reacted on a previous show when I was crushing the team for the performance they had against Georgia, just because they were out of their league on multiple avenues there. But Sonny Dykes is the son of a coach. His father coached at Texas Tech, was extremely successful there, coached for 150 games there, which I think is like the all-time record for coach games in Texas Tech's history. And he exceeded expectations by far. It's unbelievable what they did. Huge concerns, though, like Ryan alluded to, with obviously your quarterback leaving and a senior-driven team. So it's going to be an uphill battle from here. I do have faith, though, in a guy that has basically been bred to be a coach and to be a person that is a molder of men. The question really going forward is, can you stay consistent with the recruiting like Ryan said? Yes, going to the national championship obviously helps walking into, schools across the country, and having your chest out there to some degree, despite the performance. But at the same time, the Big 12 is improving every year. There are guys like Brent Venables in that league that they're going to get better. Sarkisian has done a good job at Texas. He is getting better and better every year. And it's going to be one of those question marks really for him, is just the sustainability, like Ryan said earlier, for him. But he is a really good coach. He recruited extremely well at SMU. But another point that Ryan said, too, that is so true, similar to the Notre Dame situation with Marcus Freeman, TCU and Notre Dame isn't for everyone. And you're not going to attract just the cream of the crop football players because of just the environment that the school is really focused on, where sports are somewhat secondary. So it's going to be an uphill battle for him. But for a guy that's been a coach for his entire life, the son of a coach, a guy who won, the Bear Bryant Coach of the Year award, have a lot of faith in him to be consistent going forward with this TCU program.
Yeah, my thoughts on this, in agreement on most of these points. I think that I'm like a low A- for Sonny Dykes, just because of the beating they took in the national championship game is not very optimistic in general. Yeah, but for him to get them there, that bad taste in our mouth is kind of stuck, which is why I think it's impacting my thoughts on this. But for him to get there is an accomplishment. I think we can agree, though, there was a lot of luck on TCU's side. And I need to know if that is something that can be replicated. And a lot of people are going to agree that TCU is one of the teams that's most likely to have a bit of a drop-off next year because they're losing three of the biggest production outputs that they had on offense in Max Duggan, in Kendre Miller, and in Quentin Johnson. It's going to be tough to replace those guys and to be back at the top competing for the Big 12, as you said, Matt, with a lot of really good surging teams right now that they are going to be facing off with. So if they can maintain that level of success and at least be competitive, I think things are looking very positive. To finish with that high of a recruiting ranking is a massive accomplishment for a program like TCU. This is not Texas. They don't need to finish in the top 10. And we know that Sonny Dykes will roll out there with the talent that he has and put up a battle against whoever he faces. So I'm optimistic. A little wary, though, because of the amount of lucky plays that happened for him during that season. Guys, it's a great note to wrap us up on. That's going to be it for today's show. At Joe DeLeone, at Sims Complete QB, at Rise and Draft, all on Twitter. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with more. Make sure you hit subscribe, and we'll be back next week.